Alright, so in the last section, what we did is we just took a look at PHP in general, just the fundamentals, basics, things like variables, arrays, functions, things like that. So now we're going to move on to object-oriented programming. And if you're very new to object-oriented programming, it may seem a little intimidating, because you're dealing with a whole new type of syntax and just a whole new concept altogether. Alright, but it's really not that difficult, and it can make your life a lot easier, at least in that aspect. It'll make your programming much cleaner, much easier to read, and also much easier to debug, because you have objects and everything is encapsulated into that class, and it's just much easier to find problems. All right. Another really good reason to use object-oriented programming is that it prevents you from having to repeat yourself. All right, which is something known as DRY, which stands for don't repeat yourself. All right, which is a really important concept in programming in general. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. And the first thing we're going to talk about is classes and objects. All right, so let's say that I'm going to use a real-world example, and we're going to create a user object and a user class. I know a lot of other tutorials will have things like cars, like they'll have a class for cars, and then maybe a method or a function for a drive, and that's just not a real-world example. So let's just pretend that we have some kind of application that we're creating where users can register, log in, things like that. All right, so first thing we want to do here in our PHP tags is define a class. All right, and you just want to use the word class, and then we're going to say user. All right, now this doesn't have to be uppercase, but it's a convention that I follow when I create classes. I always have the first letter uppercase. Now, two main things go into a class, and that's going to be properties and methods. So properties are just attributes. All right, so a user might have a name, an email attribute or property, things like that. All right, and we're going to get into properties in the next video, but what I want to go over here is methods. All right, now methods are nothing more than functions inside of a class. All right, so if I say method and then I say function, I mean the same thing. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a method. All right, so we use something called access identifiers, and we have public, and we also have private and protected. All right, and we're gonna go over this throughout the course, but basically public means that you can access it, whether it's a property or a method, from outside of the class. All right, private is going to make it so that you can't access it outside the class. Only methods inside of the class can use it. And then we have protected, which means that it's blocked from outside of the class, but any class that extends that class can use it. All right, and we'll go over inheritance later on. So let's create a public function called register. All right, so you can see we set it up just like a regular function, and let's go ahead and let's just echo out something. We'll say echo user registered. Okay, so we have our method, and all it's doing is echoing something out. This isn't something you would usually do, but I just want to do it just so you can see that it's actually going to be ran. Alright, so the way that we can use this is we need to instantiate the class, which is really easy. All we need to do is set up a variable here. Let's call it user, and I'm going to set it to new, and then the name of the class, which is user. Alright, so now this variable is part of the user object, and we can use it to call methods and properties. So let's go ahead and let's say user register. Alright, and if we save that and go and reload, call to member function register. Oops, I forgot to do the uppercase here. Okay, it is case sensitive. Alright, so now we're getting user registered. So let's create another method here. We'll say public function login. All right, now this is most likely going to take in a couple parameters. We're going to want a username and a password. All right, and then what this would usually do is do some interaction with the database, make sure that these match, and then log you in and redirect. But in our case, we're just going to echo out something. All right, so let's echo out the username, and then we'll just concatenate on a string that says is now logged in. Okay, now if let's comment that out, and let's say user login. Okay, if we just do that, we're going to get an error because, well, I forgot. Okay, we're still going to get an error because we don't have our arguments. All right, so let's pass in a username. We'll just say Brad, and then password, say 1234. Okay, and if we reload that, now we get Brad is now logged in. All right, so you can pass in your parameters like that. Now, the last important thing that I want to show you about classes and methods is the constructor. All right, so let me comment this out. And we're going to go up to the top here, and we're going to say public function, and then we want to use double underscore and then the word construct. All right, and set it up just like a regular method. Okay, and then in here, let's just say echo constructor called. All right, so let's go ahead and save that, and let's reload the page, and you'll see we're getting constructor called. All right, now we didn't call that down here, but what a constructor does is it runs whatever code we put in here when the class is instantiated. All right, so when we did this is when this was called. All right, and that's really important to use for things like setting up default properties and stuff like that, getters and setters and all that, which we'll get into later on. Now we also have what's called a destructor. All right, so to do that, let's go to the bottom here, say public function. Okay, and then we want double underscore destruct, and let's just echo okay, and let's uncomment the register. Okay, we'll run register. All right, now let's reload. Okay, and you can see what happened here is that we instantiated the object, so we got constructor called. We ran the register function or method, that got called, and then after everything is done with, the destructor got called. All right, so this calls before, this calls after. So you can use this for things like closing database connections and just anything that you need to run at the end of a script. So the last thing I want to show you is how we can call a method from inside another method. All right, so let's say public function, and we'll just say auth user, okay, to authenticate the user. All right, and that'll get passed in username, password. Okay, and then we're just going to do the same thing we did in the login. Okay, except we'll say is authenticated. Okay, so we want to call auth user from within login. All right, so what we want to do is just say we want to use this, okay, the this keyword, and then we can say auth user, and we're going to want to pass in the username and password that's passed to the login. Oops. All right, so let's save that. Actually, let's make sure that we run login. Okay, and then we'll reload, and let's just comment these out. And we're getting Brad is authenticated. Okay, so we're calling auth user from login. So whenever you want to access any method or any property, you want to use this if you're within the class. All right, so that's going to be it for this video. In the next video, we'll take a look at properties, and we'll also look further into access modifiers or access identifiers.